Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we're reviewing Summer Helena, just released this week, finally, a couple months after her initial release out on JP. The review, per usual, is going to be the character overview, base and total stat analysis, a couple other metrics, all leading up to the report card, where I'll kind of summarize what we've talked about, a little bit of the overview of what we're going to see with the class and job review and her abilities and her kit for a final grade, and then go into those abilities in particular. There's a lot to really understand about her that I think people have a general misconception about, and I'm going to break some hearts today. We're going to look at the TMR review and then some general thoughts as well to kind of summarize everything, finally ending with a couple Esper recommendations and a little bit about the weapon optimization. So, character overview, brand new lightning unit here. They gave her the Beach Blossom main job with the White Mage and Paladin Sub jobs. She does equip gloves, a little bit unique, with the hats, cloths, and accessories as well, with a move of 3, a jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit. Yes, we get another one of those. Now, from a resistance standpoint, it's actually in a pretty good starting spot. 15% to missile, 10% to both slash and magic. Those are the three most prevalent damage types that you see nowadays in the game. 0% to pierce and minus 10% to strike. Not terribly worried about either of those, at least the strike one I'm not. From a resistance ailment perspective, she is a 97 faith unit, so you do want to be cognizant of what you can potentially get afflicted by. 50% to stun and 50% to slow are actually two of the more common ones you may see. 10% to immobilize certainly helps as well with some of the Elia metas that we've seen. Overall, not a bad starting spot for ailment resistances. Now, as we transition into the base stat analysis, now, HP-wise, she's actually a little bit on the average side, if not below average side. She's actually a little squishier than you would normally like to see, given the range of many of her abilities. Now, where she is on this chart, she's actually right around where a lot of the missile units and evade units are. So her overall HP is not necessarily in line with where you might expect to see someone where they end up on the battlefield. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But from a magic stat perspective, she is a mage. She actually does skew lower here on the base magic side of things. Now, there are a handful of ways in which she continually adds to her magic stat, so she does recover greatly from having a lower overall base magic, but a little bit surprising to say the least. From an agility perspective, definitely on the lower spectrum side of things here, 53 agility just from the base, but overall doesn't really affect a whole lot. We'll see that in just a couple minutes. And then finally, the dexterity and the luck, both average, the luck a little bit above average, but overall, there's not really a lot of strengths here in terms of base stat applications. If anything, it's probably weaker than I'm used to seeing for many of the 100 cost units. Now, if we kind of transition those 5 graphs into these one, when we compare to what the other UR units have, yeah, she's kind of like right middle of the pack. For many of them, no real strengths. When you add in the board and the mastery nodes, things of that nature, she does recover on a few things, but also takes a step back on some of the others. So she does recover a fair amount on the magic and the agility side of things based upon what they do for the board and the nodes. But the dexterity and the luck, they really don't do much to help her out with. So she takes a pretty big step back in terms of total stats. And if we're looking at some of that, the agility that they give her on the board of 12 is the highest that they've given to units. So they do really recover for that overall lower base agility. And then the dexterity and the luck stats here, the 32 and the 46 is really, really low overall. So she does take a step back. They do end up giving her some extra magic stat based on the mastery and some of the board notes. So overall, she ends up in kind of this flip position. But that's not the end of the story, obviously. This is only one part of the character. When we look at the crit hit and crit avoid, her overall critical hit rate is very low because of that lower dexterity stat, and the crit avoid rate kind of the same because of the luck stats. So these are ones that she's not necessarily up to par with many of the other units. When we look at accuracy, definitely skews way lower on the accuracy side of things. Now, not the end of the world. Spoiler alert, she has 2 100% hit chance abilities in her main kit, so that's obviously to compensate for this. But yeah, there are no ways to boost her accuracy innately in her kit, so she really does stay at this very, very low range overall, which matters a lot when it comes to the AI, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. We look at the evasion, not an evade unit in the least. The luck stat's not even remotely close to high enough. Now we get to the report card overall. Effective HP, I'm kind of going D+ across the board here. And that's because she does have some flexibility in what you want to do for defense or spirit. And she has an innate 4 defense. You have a choice of 2 passives that can give you either 12 spirit or 12 defense. She does technically have courage in the sub job as well, so few aspects to her survivability, but a little bit squishier than what you'd expect most characters of her mage-like build to be at in this stage of the game, where we've had like 3 or 4 different mages released recently with Queen Mashari and Dark Fina and Halloween Lucia, and they all have some significantly higher bulk than she does. Now we look at the primary stat. I'm going A- here. You know, decent enough base magic stat. It's definitely on the lower side, but she's got a ton of ways to boost it in her kit and externally, so that when you do look at her total magic at the end of the day, does get quite high, which is very important for her damage output. She truly is a glass cannon in this game, and I'm going to keep re-emphasizing that and a handful of the spots here. Agility-wise, I am going with a B. She does have an agility 12% passive. I think that's a big one to keep on her, so she does end up being relatively fast when you do that. If you apply the 15% and 8% agility vision cards to the stats, the UR average is 80, and she's at 84, so she does have a little head above many of the other UR units. From an accuracy perspective, going with that D, but again, the 200% hit chance in the kit. The big demerit here against her is that there's no 35% lightning luck card yet. That's going to affect your accuracy overall. Now, you can put Secrets of the Heart on, sub VC if you want, but not having that 35% luck in a main slot, or if you put Secrets of the Heart in the main slot, now all of a sudden your comps can get, objectively a little weaker than you would normally. So definitely something to keep in mind from the accuracy perspective. Now, evasion, also going to D, not an evade unit. Movement, I'm going to C, base movement potential of 3 and 1, nothing to change that. And when we look at the passives, I'm going with a B. They're versatile passives for some nice build variety. They are slightly limited though, and they are potentially power crept in their own ways. And I do see that with the perspective that she's a 100 cost unit, where a lot of times they give some more unique passives, and that's not necessarily the case here. Now, from a counter perspective, I'm going to see very average counters overall. There is one that's like unique to her, but I wouldn't say it's incredibly overpowering or terribly unique. It's a definitely good one though. I might be a little hard on the C grade here, but it wouldn't be much higher, maybe a B minus. Now, overall kit, I'm going with a B plus. It can be built a variety of ways. The improper build can hurt you though, and this is like kind of a double-edged sword, where it is nice that she does have a variety of good sub-jobs with good abilities that can be applied across a variety of different maps and metas. That's a really good thing you want to look for. The problem is you need to get it right, and if you don't, your character is going to suffer significantly because of it. And then finally, the overall grade, which I'm going to explain this in a second. I'm going with a B. She's really great at a few things, but she can't do them all, and a lot of people are going to struggle with her AI. I think a lot of people have this idea of what she can do based upon what you look at on paper, and we'll talk about this in a second. And I'm just telling you right now, it's not the case in practice. So why the B? She looks better on paper than she will be in practice. And I immediately saw this, and I got Renan flashbacks. That's actually my biggest miss so far in all my character reviews, where I gave him like an A minus or an A grade, and he's really much lower than that. And part of it was because we looked at him on paper, and there's a bunch of things in practice related to the AI and the game balance overall that just didn't see things come to fruition. Like AoE courage removal, he's got it, Helena's got it. You want shell removal, he's got it on the sub job, she's got it on the limit break. You want a magic resistance and peril, he's got it on the main job, she's got it on the sub job. You want an anti one-shot potential, she's got courage, she's got a physical barrier. You want a curative sub job, he's got devout, she's got white mage. I'm not saying they're the same characters, they're definitely not. They're very different, they will act very differently. But it's one of those examples where you look at on paper and you're like, this character is absolutely stacked. I promise you, it's a little misleading. Part of it's build related, because when we talk about the best, most hyped ability in her kit, it is that AoE courage removal that everyone's been very excited for. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to get Sylvie flashbacks here as well, where they gave this highlight of like, oh, AoE re-raise removal. It's a lot harder to actually make work in practice than you might think. And this is also part of the case where when you talk about courage removal, well, there's two kinds of units that have courage. You have some of your more non-evade units like Snow and Dark Leela, and then you have your high evade units like Helena and Violet. Whether or not you use that courage removal ability is entirely dependent upon your build and whether or not you can even hit the evade units, or whether you're just gearing for those tankier characters instead. If you're gearing up for a super hyper accuracy to hit those evade units, her bulk is going to suffer significantly for that. So again, massive trade-offs on how she'll actually function. Now, it's also AI related, things that you're going to want to toggle on and off. It's not as straightforward as you might think. We'll see that in a couple of slides here in the ability breakdown. But yeah, the AI is going to give some people problems in terms of what it prioritizes to do for attacks. Now, it's also sub-job dependent, where again, you look at all the sub-jobs, all three of them have something really, really good. You can only equip one sub-job at a time, though, so it's misleading to think of her as all of these things when she's really not all of them simultaneously. And then finally, very boomer bust in battle capability. Her job really is just to do a ton of damage and kill things very fast. To be fair, that is a lot of what lightning does tend to do historically as well, so she does fit with lightning very well. And then finally, she, in my opinion, looks way better as a one-fight unit, where the limit break, the courage, both one-time usage things, those are major aspects to her domination on the battlefield, and once you use both of those, she definitely kind of falls back to earth in many regards. So let's talk a little more in depth about why I'm thinking this way. So number one, the passive abilities. Siren's Call is the one you're probably going to have almost always. It's a 60% magic buff, a decrease of HP of 5%. That 5% is actually not that big though. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But that 60% magic buff is one of the ways in which she gets that very high magic stat. March of the Saints is another way to further increase the magic stat, but obviously you make her far more brittle when you do that by not having either Heightened Passion or Holy Knight's Protection equipped instead. Now, Heightened Passion is my second favorite one here. The agility of 12% is very strong. The Spirit of 12 is also really nice. And Holy Knight's Protection isn't the worst one. 12 defense is nice, but again, lower base HP. So that HP of 12% doesn't really materially make her much more bulky. It certainly helps. So I appreciate it being here, and it will help in a variety of metas. But a lot of characters of Holy Knight's Protection, that's not really unique. Now, the big thing to point out here is that she has no passive for Spirit Penetration. Almost all characters, all damage dealers in the current state of the game for the past year and a half to 2 years at a baseline have had 40 penetration of their attack type. She does not. So when you're building her, that's another handicap that you have to build in here, where you have to incorporate Spirit Penetration if you are anticipating going against tanks. Now against evade units that do skew lower on the Spirit, it's not going to matter. Or squish your damage dealers that have no Spirit, not going to matter. But that is an absolutely noteworthy thing to keep in mind. Now we look at the counter abilities. Every Rose Has Its Thorn should expand the range here, but I think it's like a 3 or 4 square range. 20% chance to proc. It's a typeless damage, so it actually will hit relatively hard, but it doesn't get the lightning attack modifiers, it doesn't get the magic attack modifiers. Being neutral damage, it's kind of good, also kind of bad. Regenerator, not the worst one. The thing is with this regen though, is simply that because she can be such a glass cannon, if she ends up getting one shot a handful of times, regen oftentimes won't be the difference between her getting finished off or not finished off. It's a good one. I don't think it's going to change a whole lot though. Paladin's Guard is a pretty decent one too, but again, it's only physical damage related, so really kind of applicable in a handful of situations. So these aren't the worst counters. They're just average. I really don't know if I have a favorite. I think it's truly situational. Now from the main job, the buffs. Rosy Recovery is a very interesting one, how it works with Enchanting Skies, which we'll get to in a second. It's a self-heal of 210, also a 15% TP restore, which is kind of important because Enchanting Skies is her main buff on her ability here. It's an attack and magic buff for 40% for herself and allies. It's a perfect square around her, so very large AoE. It also increases her damage done by 50%, but it will also cost TP based on half of what the AP cost was, which is why Rosy Recovery, being able to restore some TP, actually is a really nice mechanic for second fights if she needs to restore some TP. Now, just from a damage perspective, that 50% boost applies in the very final step of the damage calc after the Faith modifier, so it's basically just taking whatever her damage would have been and increasing it by 1.5 times. Now, one thing about the TP cost of this, I ran a couple simulations. I don't think you're ever truly going to run the risk of running out of TP, but there certainly are some situations depending upon how long your battle goes on for and just how many of the potential white mage buffs that she uses in terms of Kiraga to, that first turn or second turn. But overall, I'm not too worried about it. Now, the one big thing I do want to point out here that, again, kind of different and not as good as many of the modern DPS, this is a dispellable buff 100% entirely. Many of the buffs we see nowadays are conditional buffs, meaning as long as you have something applied to you, that buff will remain despite being dispelled potentially. If you get dispelled, all of this is gone. So while it is good, there's definitely some counterplay here. When we look at the main job, the offensive abilities, Beach Spike is a 121% modifier ability, a 250 restore CT. I do like that a lot. Obviously, she is on the speedier side, so that's a nice thing to get her turn quicker. And I'm going to look at the 100% hit chance abilities here for a moment and just bring up on the screen here the heights and ranges. Deep Sea Impact and Solarization are both 100% hit chance. One is a unit type attack, the other is an AoE type attack. Now, Deep Sea Impact is the highest modifier here at 200%. It's also a decreased evasion rate of 30 for the target. That's good. It's not going to really help Helena a lot though. It's probably more for her teammates. And I say that because by the time she uses Deep Sea Impact, it's probably going to be the third or fourth turn. And given how glass cannon she is, hopefully you've killed the person by the time Helena uses her fourth or fifth attack. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Solarization is the AoE here. I'm sorry for some text overlap. It's a 100% hit chance, also absorbs 30% of the damage done. So again, there's a really important break point where you need to make sure if she's taking damage, she doesn't get one shot, that she at least retains some HP so that if she uses Solarization, she will get some of it back. Midsummer Magic is the most hyped ability in this kit. It's the giant AoE. Courage removal also has a chance to inflict stop. But again, the problem you're going to run into here is that it shares the same modifier with Solarization. One's 100% hit chance, one's not. So if you're trying to AoE dispel courage of, let's say, a group of evade units, well, she's going to opt for Solarization instead, so you're not going to actually remove the courage. And if you want to use a Midsummer Magic on them, well, then you have to hyper build her for accuracy. And I really mean it. Hyper build everything you possibly can to hit these evade units in the hope that you dispel their courage. And even then, when you talk about maybe going against someone like Snow, oftentimes Snow is played with 2 ranged units, right? So he's usually a little bit by himself. If that's the case, you're going to run the risk where she's going to prioritize Deep Sea Impact on him because it's a higher modifier as opposed to the Midsummer Magic. So even Snow with his courage, not a guarantee that you're going to remove it. We're not even considering the Limit Break at this time, where Limit Break will be prioritized first because of the damage output. So when you go through the AI priority of damage, this Midsummer Magic is very overrated in terms of how it's going to actually function in the game for you. I'm sorry to dash your hopes, but that's the truth. Now we look at the sub jobs here. Again, all of these have something really awesome on it. You just can't use all of them at the same time. So Thunder Surge is a very good buff here where it increases lightning resistance penetration. That is brand new, unique to the game, other than Immortal Zazan's TMR, that you can have an element resistance penetration. The magic resistance penetration of 40 is really good. This is a good buff, but again, if you have this sub job on, means you're losing out on 2 of the other sub jobs. Trench Spire is another excellent ability too. The magic resistance and parallel of 38%. But again, you're going to get into some really muddy waters here with what the AI prioritizes when you have this on as well. Now the next sub job is the White Mage. There's no full life on here. To me, the only ability you would ever use is Curaga here for the AoE healing for teammates. Protect and Shell, very, very niche. And she has the kind of AI where it's a DPS AI. So when she uses Protect and Shell, she will use it and move forward, so she won't stand in place. And if an enemy is in range, she will always prioritize hitting an enemy as opposed to healing a teammate. So this is a very good sub job to have for potential like Guild War Fight 2 situations where you want some kind of curative potential to heal your team back up. But once she gets in range of enemies, White Mage is basically off the table. Which brings us to the final sub job of the Paladin. And quite honestly, the only good ability here is Immortal Spirit. Now there will be a future buff to this where it's going to also nullify confusion and paralyze. So that's really nice from an ailment perspective. But everything else here is really not anything you're going to want to have turned on basically ever. And so Immortal Spirit only has 1 usage, which means once you use it, this sub job basically becomes useless for the entire duration after that. Which brings us finally to the Limit Break. This actually is a very good Limit Break. It's a pretty large AoE here, 200% modifier, AoE resistance down of 30%. Again, this is going to be her first priority casting before she does anything else in the main job. And one thing I just want to bring attention, I mentioned it earlier, this is a relatively close enough range ability where, again, being a glass cannon, she's going to need to be kind of near the enemies in order to start using many of these. And even if you go back and look at our initial job here, 4 squares away is a decent enough range. Same thing can be said for the AoEs, but again, you'd be surprised it's like 1 square slightly too close. You're gonna have to be really careful with where she positions herself. But for now, moving on, the mastery ability here, 20% magic attack resistance penetration, crucially important for her damage output, and also a magic of 10%, which is cool, but like, not terribly material. It's literally like 35 magic as we saw, so whatever. Now for the TMR overall, this isn't a bad TMR. This is Human Killer of 25 for 3 turns for magic attacks only for allies, and it is a cross-shaped AoE. So there's a couple things to like in that it is a unique kind of modifier to apply to a teammate that may not already be applied in any of their buffs. But you also get the downside that it's magic attacks only, and the downside that it is a cross-shaped AoE. So from a movement potential, slightly limited in what it can do. This is a good addition to the game in that it doesn't already exist in some form or another, but I don't think this is an overpowering TMR by any means. Now my general thoughts overall. No innate spirit penetration is a big downside when going against any kind of tank or bulkier damage dealer. You need to gear externally for it. There are a couple ways. It's not a huge problem if you are going against evade because many of those units don't stack spirit. But again, very matchup dependent to get right. And the Ibarra vision card and the Dark Ramu vision card coming out are both excellent, top tier choices for her in that as a unit effect, they both give her 20 spirit penetration. You absolutely are going to want to utilize both of those in any of your builds. Now, I keep saying this, you also need to be smart with your builds as you can't do everything at once. You can't be hyper accurate and have bulk. It's one or the other. You can't have courage and Curaga your team. Like, there's only so many things you can do. Now, that includes the AI toggles. As we mentioned, the AI is going to get very confused for what you're going to want it to do based upon what the maximum damage output is going to be. Probably a little too glass cannony for where the game has gone as of late. As we're seeing on many characters, almost all of them have some form of non-dispellable buff that gives them some kind of survivability or some kind of impenetrable resistance like AoE or unit resistance. Many of them have barriers. She literally has nothing except the one-time courage use. It's still valuable. You just don't want to rely on a one-time courage to be the difference between you winning and losing your fight. Now, TP does not seem to be an issue. I want to point that out here because a lot of people are gonna, not necessarily do the math for that mechanic. Stat-wise, in my opinion, a little weak compared to the other 100 cost units, quite frankly. I get what they're going for in terms of her offensive potential, particularly when you look at Lightning as an element, all the different apparels that they have for like lightning imperil and whatnot. But yeah, from like a dexterity and luck perspective, she's definitely like below the ladder on where most of them fall. And in my opinion, much better in one fight scenarios, as we mentioned before. One-time courage, one-time limit break. And so yeah, that's kind of where I stand on her overall. Now for Esper Synergies, you do want to look for lightning attack, human killer, magic attack, and definitely accuracy. You want to put accuracy somewhere in her kit, even if you're not hitting those hyper evade units, where those B and C tier evade units that have a lot of their evasion built in innately, you're still going to miss if you don't gear anything for accuracy. Now my favorite Espers for that last node are these 5. Now these are all magic oriented Espers, which bring their own unique things in addition to just the accuracy, what they might get for lightning attack or magic attack. They all have a nice variety of agility as well, Shiva being the fastest. Bloody Moon I like a lot for the spirit, little extra bulk there. Tonberry is a very good choice here for cost limited stuff, where it does give a lot of really great benefits to those lightning casters. Ramu obviously up and down the board has the magic attack, the lightning attack, the accuracy, all really great things here. From a pure overall best damage perspective, Bahamut is still the de facto #1, but again, damage isn't everything. For some form of bulk, I do recommend the Earth Esper, I always forget her name, and Freeze's, you know, she at least has the 5 AoE resistance, some slash resistance, a couple ways you can build up that bulk. From that perspective, Freeze's has the Spirit as well, so not a bad choice there. And then finally, Europa for like a handful of miscellaneous reasons, where it's got missile resistance, pierce resistance, lightning attack, whole bunch of things, magic attack you can pick between. Now, if you were to say prioritizing which ones I like the most, it's probably these 4 in no real particular order. Bahamut, Ramu, Europa, Bloody Moon, but these 4 I think are probably some of the more flexible ones across a variety of situations. Now from a weapon optimization perspective, again, she's got no innate spear penetration, so the Elven Gloves is a welcome addition to the game here, but it could be debatable whether 20 spear penetration is really that more material than the 10 spear penetration that you would get on a Trust Stone passive. It's not like the magic stats here are off the board crazy, and the accuracy and crit rate stats here aren't anything really crazy as well. The aim build, never build this one. That's a terrible build. 10 accuracy is like literally nothing. It's going to help her do nothing in any of her builds. I actually think the critical one might be equal to the magic one, just given that I don't think that 30 magic is a massive difference. It's also worth noting, though, that when you talk about variety of builds, Revelka's TMR is actually a really good one as well, where it still retains 15 spear penetration. The stats are definitely worse, but it gives you a lot of gearing flexibility, where if you want to say put on the Alexandrite ring and a piece of cloth, you can now put this TMR weapon on instead, max her magic and damage output in a different kind of way. So I do like that. And then finally, Dark Glove 6, also still a great option. It's really just depending on the level of spear penetration you want, whether you want to get up to that 40 with the vision cards, or whether you're okay with 30 with just a Trust Stone passive. It's got 50 more magic than the Elven Gloves does. It's got magic attack 15, so still has some good modifiers. And then finally, the Power Gloves and Battle Gloves. I've never crafted these. I don't recommend it per se. It's just worth mentioning. They have insanely high crit rate builds, like in the high 20s, 28 crit rate plus. And they only have magic attack modifiers. So not a bad choice if you are trying to, let's say, just one-shot a bunch of squishy damage dealers or low spirit teams. That's really matchup dependent, though. Very, very niche overall. I wouldn't say there's a best glove here. Dark Glove 6 seems to be a really safe choice, but the Elven Gloves certainly are a good one too. And the Revelka TMR I actually think is a very, very beneficial build potential for her. And that's the Summer Helena review in a nutshell. I know a lot of people are very excited for her. I don't think she's going to have the impact or effect that many of you are expecting, though. I still think she's a good addition to the game from a lightning perspective, where they have tried to kind of dabble into that magic build before with Ibarra, Renan. People are still Skahal stands, so like if you are trying to build for that magic team, even Resnick in some capacity, not as a damage dealer, but as a magic-oriented unit, even Queen, who does have some magic-oriented potential as well. Summer Helena is definitely a welcome addition to the cast to really round them out and give you a lot of options, but I don't think she's going to significantly make a dent into a lot of things. You'll probably see a fair amount of her up and down, the Guild Wars and ladder and arena overall, but I don't really think she's going to make any waves, pun intended, as a summer unit. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all soon.